just briefly introduce myself. My name is Michael Dominguez. I am the Avalara Strategic Alliance Manager, assigned to Central Data and to running the partnerships for the Infor ecosystem as well. Here's just a brief disclaimer. We hope you find this helpful, but just a reminder, the session is for informational purposes only and is not legal or tax advice. So here's our team. Again, my name is Michael Dominguez. We're actually going to have Gordon Walsh join us a little bit later. He was initially going to start the conversations about 1099s. And then we also have Thomas, who introduced himself just now. He is our sales executive with Avalara. So I am going to go ahead and jump a few slides ahead. Oh, here you go. So here's our overview. Again, I'm going to jump a few slides ahead so Gordon can join us. So just give us a second here, and we'll work our way backwards. So we'll keep it interesting. And so again, my name's Michael Dominguez. I'm going to touch. You saw briefly on the agenda. I'm going to talk about sales tax nexus, but to give you all just a little bit of background, Avalara we're a global sales tax and compliance company. We have almost 5,000 employees. We're a global company, and so about 6 years ago, there's a Supreme Court ruling, South Dakota versus Wayfair, and so before, companies just had, they had their nexus where they were physically located. With that ruling that ruled in favor of South Dakota, companies now had the responsibility to collect and remit sales taxes where they surpassed a certain economic threshold, where they sold, let's say, over $100,000 of sales in different states that they were shipping their product to. And so we always like to put this slide up when we're presenting to different folks about, kind of what are the ramifications 6 years later. Can't believe it's already been 6 years. But according to this independent survey last year, about 72% of respondents still think online sales tax laws are complex and confusing. About 40% of respondents say that economic nexus laws have increased the cost of managing tax requirements, and about 72% of respondents have invested in technology to help with calculation and reporting of online sales tax requirements. For instance, maybe some of what you all are currently doing with Central Data, if you're on Cloud Suite. So this is just a good reminder that, with this Supreme Court ruling, it added a lot of complexity because all of the states have different rules and requirements for their different economic thresholds. And so again, some of what's new with the Nexus is all 45 states have state sales tax plus District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. There are some states who have reconsidered their Nexus thresholds because it's not only the amount of business you've done in the state, but a number of transactions. So about 10 states have dropped the transaction threshold so far. So I really like putting up this map. Here you can see, again, each state is different, right? Each state has different economic thresholds, different requirements for doing business in their states. So you can see in the navy blue, those are gross sales. So when you're thinking about the distribution space, you may not have like a lot of sales tax, but you could have significant number of tax exempt customers, and you do need to collect those exemption certificates. So you look at gross sales, you look at gross sales excluding sales made through a marketplace. Also included there are retail sales and then taxable sales as well. So what is Nexus? So there's different types of Nexus. Again, there's always been the physical Nexus requirement. So as a distributor, if you have warehouses in the state, you automatically have that physical Nexus. There's economic nexus. I briefly touched upon that. Again, different states have different economic nexus thresholds, whether that's the number of transactions or that's including the amount of business, goods and services sold into that state. You have click-through nexus, which where seller rewards in-state partners or influencers for direct or indirect referrals or leads through website links. You have affiliate nexus, which is a connection between a remote seller and in-state seller that may be related in some way or perform certain work that can be attributed to the remote seller. And then we have marketplace nexus. So these are marketplace facilitators which may be required to collect or remit sales tax instead of the individual seller if it triggered nexus in the state and provides e-commerce infrastructure. We're talking customer service, payment processing services, and marketing. So here are some nexus creating activities. Again, think about your business. Do you have more than one location, right? Do you have a physical nexus in another state? So you have multi-state locations, maybe particularly when we're looking at the distribution space. Do you maintain inventory or have any third-party owned warehouses? And Gordon later on is going to talk about 1099s. Keep that in mind. And then obviously also there's drop shipments and remote sales as well. So there's it seems like a constantly growing or expanding list of these nexus creating activities that you need to be aware of. And again, they fluctuate from state to state. All right, so when we think about sales tax compliance, any business first needs to figure out where you have nexus, right? So Avalara can help you if you don't know where you may have nexus. We do provide a premium sales tax risk assessment. And this helps just double check your sales tax obligation by the different locations where you may be operating out of, especially if you're a rapidly growing or expanding business. Because again, almost every state requires businesses to register, to collect, and file the sales taxes if their sales volume is high enough. So you can use our premium sales tax risk assessment to find out if you are on the hook to basically be doing your sales tax collecting and remitting sales tax, and we'll talk about returns later on as well. So this is just a comprehensive report in this premium sales tax risk assessment where it'll help you identify where your company has created nexus, when the company created nexus, some of the product service taxability by state, and then also, more importantly, it's a greater look back into what is your liability for any unreported tax, interest, and penalties. Okay, I'm gonna now talk about audit readiness. Here's some common audit triggers. Why do businesses get audited? You saw that long and growing list of nexus creating activities, right? So perhaps you have somehow triggered nexus and you haven't registered in those states that you need to be registered in. Other ways where the government may be able to find is just open source information that's out there that's being provided by the state and local tax filings. It could be trickle down referrals through audits of other vendors, and then of course just public information over the internet. Oh, sorry. So before we go into this next slide and I have Thomas take over, one of the key slides I just want to have you all keep in mind when you're thinking about sales tax compliance is there's a lot to cover, right? You know, where do you have nexus? And this is a great chart to show you kind of your sales tax and compliance obligations. They're in the middle banner, kind of that where. And so on the bottom banner, we have how Avalara can help support with these challenges of managing sales tax compliance. So if you have to know where you have nexus, right? And so I mentioned this before with our premium sales tax risks assessment to help you identify where you have nexus. There's also just registration. Once you find out that you have nexus in those states, we can help you there with our Avalara licensing, calculating your sales tax through Avalara AvaTax, which is our very sophisticated sales tax engine that goes down to the rooftop level. And I did mention, because in the distribution space, there is a lot of manual exemption certificate management taking place. Avalara has a way we can help you automate that. And then of course, once you collect the sales tax, you have to remit that to the tax authority, and we help provide that with our Avalara returns. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Thomas, who's going to cover exemption certificate management and some of our other Avalara products and services.
Thanks, Michael. All right, so insight number 3, we'll talk more about exemption certificate management. Being in the distribution space, this is going to be one of the most important parts of your compliance process. So when we look at the exemption certificate process, it's not just a collect and forget action. There's really a process to it. You need to collect, you need to properly store so that you can then track, do reporting, and analyze those certificates you have on file. If you're doing business across the country, different states have different requirements, particularly around expiration. You may need to be collecting updated certificates from your customers. Just as a best practice, most companies like to use 3 years as a time span to collect updated exemption certificates from their customers. So Avalara has a solution that's going to help you reduce that risk of exposure for not having the proper documentation on file. We can streamline that management process across the entire document lifestyle. And if you're utilizing AvaTax as well, we can actually help with the compliance process by creating an audit trail, attaching those transactions to a corresponding exemption certificate. So from a solution standpoint, on the front end, it is a very simple user interface to utilize. And we support both the customer and vendor exemption side of things as well. We understand that you purchase tax exempt, so you need to make sure that your vendors have your documentation as well. Our ECM solution has some OCR technology built in as well as automated tax ID verification. And we actually have some integrated TTR tax law with exemption content. So think what documentation is required for what type of customer. We have all that built into the solution on a state-by-state basis. From a back end, we support thousands of different exemption certificate documents. I mentioned that deep integration to AvaTax. And if you're a current AvaTax exemption or cert capture customer, there's no data migration necessary to use this latest version, ECM Pro. And then you can also see our risk and security credentials as well. So I'll take a brief moment to talk about the full Avalara compliance suite, and particularly where ECM falls in as well. We've made a concerted effort to support the vast variety of different ways you need to maintain compliance, looking both at you, your customers, and your vendors. So you as a business, you have some obligations, comply with business licensing and tax registrations, assessing your tax compliance risk, and is voluntary disclosure a requirement, and even managing property tax assessments and return documentation. Avalara supports this with our license and registration solutions. We support a variety of different requirements there. Michael mentioned our sales tax risk assessment. First and foremost, Avalara is a technology company that supports all of these different solutions, but we also have a professional services division made up of active CPAs and former sales tax state auditors to help you with this process. And then we also have property tax support as well. When it comes to your sales, you have a requirement to calculate the appropriate tax, file and remit to the states. We mentioned the customer exemption certificates. And if you're doing business internationally, you may have an e-invoicing requirement as well. In addition, you need to understand the taxability of your products. If you go cross-border, making sure you have your HS codes in order, customs and duties, and then digitally collecting and filing IRS informational tax forms. Avalara has a solution for each of these requirements, from AvaTax and calculations to exemption certificates, returns and reporting, e-invoicing. For your items and product taxability, we can provide support with our tax research solution, item classification, cross-border, and 1099 and W-9. As Michael mentioned, we're going to dig deeper into the 1099 and W-9 support we provide here shortly. It doesn't stop there though. You still have requirements on the vendor side. You may have use tax reporting requirements. We understand this is a requirement of yours as well. You have a requirement to verify and accrue taxes on your purchases potentially. You need to, again, provide those vendor exemption certificates and report that use tax as well on your returns. And so what you'll see is that with our solutions we've already mentioned, even on the vendor side, we provide support as well. We have AP functionality now built into AvaTax. Again, we support those vendor exemptions, tax and reporting, e-invoicing, etc. So these make up our Avalara products and solutions. You can see our core products at the top and the supporting products we mentioned. We provide integrations as well to a variety of ERP and accounting platforms, particularly Enforce CSD, but we also provide integrations to different CRM platforms, e-commerce. If you're doing marketplace sales, we have extractors built to pull in those sales for reporting purposes. And we also have point of sale content, and we can even build out to an API. And from a professional services standpoint, we support the streamlined sales tax program. We mentioned the sales tax risk assessment, as well as implementation and support. Finally, from a managed services standpoint, we can provide managed services when it comes to those exemption certificates, any substantial licensing requirements, as well as item classification and reporting. Michael, I'll hand it back over to you, and then we'll check on the 1099s here momentarily.
Okay, great. Thank you, Thomas, for that overview of our products and services. And we're just getting in touch with Gordon, who's going to cover 1099s for us. I am going to actually go back to the 1099 section. So just bear with us as we just back up and recapture everything Thomas and I covered when it comes to Avalara and our core products, as well as our products and services. And I know it was a lot of information we threw at you, but hopefully it was helpful to see, some of those nexus creating activities, and just think about where you may have that economic nexus and how Avalara can help us support. So let me get back to the agenda, and then can also just check in and see if Gordon's with us.
Appreciate it. I'm glad to get to chat with you guys here. So, this is really all about the 1099 side of things. And I think the first step to being able to speak to where our technology is helpful and how we can be a tool is understanding, how businesses are caught in the middle in between these inefficiencies and liabilities. So if you look at our graphic in front of you, we kind of have our contractors on the left side, and step one is that contractor gives you a W-9 upon your request that you are, new vendor, new contractor. We need a W-9 to prove that relationship to the IRS, right? Once we have that, if you can click again, that's where we use that W-9 information at year end to file a 1099 with the IRS. Obviously, that's a huge piece of what we do, but we're already now stuck in the middle of working with contractors on one side and working with the IRS on the other, right? Because the contractor doesn't send the 1099 or W-9 information directly to the IRS. We're stuck in the middle of that. If you can click again. Now, once we've filed with the 1099, now we need to send that copy off to the contractor so that they can do their own taxes, because that's always been, to me, the interesting part is that we don't actually file these taxes. The requirement of the IRS getting their cut of all this money comes from the contractor, even though it's our responsibility to do all the making the filings happen, right? So now we're back to moving things over to the contractor, and then one more click for me. And then at the end of the day, we are liable to an audit from the IRS if the IRS comes to us and says, hey, something didn't match, right? And we get that in the form of a B notice several months later because we filed a 1099 without having matching data to that individual contractor. Or they audit us to say, we want to know, show us the W-9s. We want to see all those W-9s between every non-employee that you've made payments to, whether it was $600 or less, or they're C Corp, an S Corp, an LLC taxed as a Corp. We don't care. We want to see a W-9 for all of those to establish that relationship. One more click for me. This whole process just creates a ton of inefficiencies and liabilities. And so filing a 1099 is usually not that big of a problem, or just the process of gaining a W-9 isn't necessarily a problem. It's all of the inefficiencies and liabilities that come from all of having to move that data back and forth multiple places. And for some reason, most businesses don't seem to have a large, or haven't gotten set up to a technology or a software or system that helps them to eliminate more of the efficiencies, reduce the liabilities, and create a more streamlined process from contractor to us as the business to the IRS. So that's where our goal is to come in here. Move to the next slide. So really a lot of those inefficiencies come from the idea of what's going on year round, right? We at Avalara look at 1099 as, or this idea, this concept of 1099 as a marathon, if you will. Kind of look at 1099 filing season. You can see right there, January has a whole bunch of stuff listed under it. That's our marathon. That month of January is the event that we're getting ready for. Whereas the rest of the year is, what are we doing to be ready for that marathon? And I look at that as training, right? So if you show up to a marathon and you don't train for it, it's going to be miserable. It's going to be a slog fest and take you tons of hours and not be very much fun. Whereas if you spend the rest of the year training, doing long runs, preparing, getting your body in shape for a marathon is a lot more fun. It's a lot easier to run. And that's how we look at this with really 1099 season should be this quick, easier thing. That's only true though if the rest of the year, around the rest of the calendar, you are prepared. And that comes from having all of these other steps kind of more streamlined, more in place, and really having a great W-9 collection process, TIN matching, address verification, storage in a centralized location, all of these things set up so that when you get to 1099, all you're having to do is pull a little bit of ERP data or the numbers of what we've paid these people, sync it up to their W-9 information and submit, right? So hopefully making a much more easy filing season for you. If we can go to the next slide. So where does Avalara 1099 come in? It starts with W-9. Our goal is to help you collect those W-9s efficiently. So we have multiple options, whether it's an email campaign to electronically collect that W-9, or we have APIs to directly integrate our collection tool into a vendor portal or an online marketplace, or even, heck, we've got some clients that will go out and just add a single kind of blank web page to a website that they can send to vendors, and the vendors will just go in there, type in some basic form information, and then have our collection tool iframe in to be able to populate that without them ever knowing who's actually doing that data collection. So we're gaining that electronically, and then in all of that, because we're having the vendor do it at that time, we can do a couple things like real-time TIN matching with the IRS, so we can verify, validate their social security number or their EIN with the IRS to make sure we reduce mismatching and those B notices that come later. We can also gain consent to electronically deliver their 1099 at year end, so that we can reduce mailing costs and the liability of mailing, sticking this 1099 in the mail, having it going to the wrong address, getting lost, anything like that. So an efficient solution to collect W-9s becomes absolutely crucial to being able to host that data later on. If you want to go to the next slide. I think you may have skipped, there we go. Once we have those W-9s, we're looking to just manage all of it in a centralized location. So having a central repository where everything is accessible in case of an audit, everything is accessible so that you can quickly re-engage one of these vendors or contractors in order to get updated information or new information, and having it in a secure place. The number of people where we're seeing it, stored in a, we'll say, questionable location or manner, sometimes quite frankly terrifies me for their own protection. So having it maintained in a platform that is encrypted, that is secure, is key. And then being able to take that, and again, it's about effective and basic management of this data, being able to take that and automatically populate 1099s with the click of a button instead of having to do a bunch of manual entry or a bunch of data analysis is key. That saves a ton of time come year end, right? And then when year end comes, our last slide here. One more click for me, one more slide. is where we're going to e-file. And that's where, again, being able to pull all that data from W-9s into a system where we can just export and import information from other accounting platforms into our platform. Our platform has smart technology to recognize where errors come, where things don't match up correctly, so you can quickly and easily identify those and make those changes. And then being able to utilize an end-to-end paper-free process, right, where we're going to e-file to the states and the IRS. We can e-deliver to the recipients, again, reducing the mailing costs and liabilities, and making sure that you feel confident in the entire process, because we've done TIN matching. We've also will do address verification with the United States Postal Service for any of those individuals that we have to do physical mailing for. Again, reducing your, what I call the yellow sticker of death, or your return to sender stickers that get plopped on the mail and come back to you later on in the year. But we're having a much more proactive plan in place so that we're able to file, feel good about everything. And should anything come back with a problem, or your vendor comes to you months down the road, we can do all the corrections for you in our system at no additional cost. So really, again, putting an end-to-end streamlined system in place to be able to manage and proactively take care of those problems that come from not having those in place. It's kind of where we're coming in, and we're hoping to be a helpful tool for anybody with 1099s. I think that's everything I've got in there. So if there's any questions I can answer, happy to take those on.
Yeah, if anyone in the audience has any questions for Gordon while we have him here, please feel free to put them in chat. And if not, again, everyone will be getting this deck, and we'll have the separate recording of Gordon's piece of 1099s as well. And we just really appreciate you joining us, Gordon, and thank you, Shane and Central Data team, for the opportunity to present to you all.